Good afternoon, learners. My name is Alex Songo. I'm going to be your tutor for the next couple of weeks doing Natural Sciences Grade 7. Prior to us going into the Term 2 stuff, I'd like us to just have a couple of touchdowns in terms of the last two topics that were supposed to have been done at school, as we are aware that we had an unfortunate closing, so therefore we'll just speak on that. I want us to go through the lesson objectives. That is what it is that we want to achieve by the end of this lesson. The first thing is that we are going to understand the definition of reproduction. The second thing is that we're going to understand how actually human reproduction occurs. The last thing is that we're going to speak about variation. All right, prior to me starting this lesson, I want us to just think about these questions. In a way, this is us checking into our prior knowledge, that is finding out where we are before we move on forward. The first thing is I want us to ask ourselves what reproduction is. Obviously, we are thinking about these as we are going through to say, do you know what that is? And therefore, that's the purpose of this tutorial. The second thing is what is it that we are speaking to when we are speaking about sex cells, particularly and in the human reproductive system, and therefore what it is that they are important for. The other question that I want us to speak to is the explanation of what variation is. To you, when you look around you, do you see any example of variation? Does the word mean anything to you at all? The last part is to give one example of variation. So that's the four questions that I want us to think about as we begin and as we start our lesson. The first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to help us rather remind ourselves as to what reproduction is. Now, an easy basic definition of reproduction is that it is number one, a life process. Now, some of us are asking ourselves when we speak about life processes, what is it exactly that we are speaking to? As the word says it itself, life meaning that anything that is living, be it plants and animals, and therefore the process part means that there's something that is being done by the things that are living, and therefore whatever it is that is occurring is called a life process. Now, that is number one. So what I've just said is reproduction is an example of a life process, and a life process is an activity that occurs in living things that happens between plants and animals. So therefore, any of the 7 life processes cannot happen to, for an example, the laptop that we are using to communicate, or rather for the purposes of this tutorial. Now, I want us to revise the 7 life processes because they are often very difficult to remember. And the easiest way to remember them is by using a mnemonic device that is called Mrs. Gren. The M stands for movement, the R stands for respiration or breathing, the S stands for sensitivity or sensing, the G stands for growth, the R reproduction, which is what we are going to be speaking about, the E that is excretion, the N that is nutrition, nutrition that is feeding. Now, maybe I need to also just revise in terms of what the 7 life processes are in an exemplary type of a way so that we all understand. Moving, that is movement from one place to another. As I'm speaking to you, there's movement that's happening in my lips. So that's an example of a life process. And obviously I'm alive, so that's why I'm able to do that. Respiration, the breathing that is happening to you and to me, that is an example of that. The sensing, that is the sensitivity. As I'm speaking to you, you can hear me. So that is an element also, or rather a life process. The growth, the age that you are at and the age that you're going to get into, which speaks very much in terms of reproduction. And we'll get into that as we go. The excretion element, that is how the body cleanses itself, be it through urine or feces when we go to the toilet and we do what people call number 2. The nutrition element, the food that we eat so that we can be able to have energy to listen. Now, going back to our lesson, so we've just revised the 7 life processes. These have been done from grade 4 all the way to grade 7. Nevertheless, going into reproduction, we are saying reproduction is one of the 7 life processes that uses sex cells to make new organisms from old ones through mating. So what is it that we are saying here? We are saying that you find 2 mature sex cells that will then mate with each other so that they can make, for an example, you as young as you are, meaning that they were your parents, your mother and your father, they mated and there were sex cells that were involved, and therefore that led into you becoming the person that you are today. Now, when we speak about these sex cells, what do we actually mean? And that's where I want us to go to. Now, sex cells are nothing else but the egg that can also be called the ovule that comes from the female. In this case, as I've made an example with yourself, that would be the mother. And then we've got what we call the sperm that will come from your father. So basically, those are what sex cells are. So sex cells are nothing else but the egg and the sperm. The egg comes from the mother or the female. The sperm comes from the father or the male. You'll see that there's a picture there that we have put up. On the left-hand side of the picture, it speaks to the male reproductive system. And I just want us to point certain elements as it's labeled that are of importance. The first thing that we know is the penis. That one is external. If you are a boy, you obviously, when you urinate, that's the part that you use. Then we've got the testes. That is where our sperms are actually made or produced. On the right-hand side, you find the female reproductive system. And again, I want us to point to certain things that are of importance. The first thing is the ovary. The ovary basically is the organ wherein a lot of the ovules are actually manufactured and where they are made. And I also want to speak about the vagina. So that's also the external in terms of the female structure of a girl or a boy or a mother or a female being. And then we speak about the uterus. And when we get into understanding reproduction, the uterus will actually be a very good example as well as to what does it do exactly. But for now, we are just going to store that one, and then we're going to move into the next slide. So basically, I've created certain steps that are meant to summarize how is it that reproduction happens in, in humans. Should have bought myself a glass of water and actually drink it as I'm speaking. Nevertheless, step number one, as I've said, this is a summary. Step number one, in the ovary, let's also remember, we said the ovary is the female part. So that is where the ovules or the eggs are actually manufactured. That's where they are made. So in the ovary, there is a process that happens once a month. It happens only to females or girls, if you may, for the purposes of understanding. So ovulation is nothing else but a process where the egg cell is removed from the ovary. It goes all the way to the uterus where it then awaits to be fertilized. So again, I'm bringing on a new term, and people are asking themselves when they speak about fertilization, what is it that Mr. Song or Alex is speaking to? Now, fertilization, ladies and gentlemen, is the combination of the egg and the sperm cell. So fertilization is a process that happens when the sperm fertilizes or rather combines with the egg cell. So that's what fertilization is. So once a month, a female ovary, the part where the ovules are made, will release an ovule or an egg that is going to await fertilization. Now, the second part of the process is that when there is mating or when there is sexual contact, then the penis will then enter the vagina. Now, as that happens, and I know that sometimes for a lot of us at grade 7 level, when we speak about these subjects, which I might add, ladies and gentlemen, are core curricula, they are in the CAPS document. So it is very much important for us to speak to them so we know exactly what it is that is happening in our bodies, so we can protect ourselves, and of course, for academic reasons, so we can pass. Before I go on, let me continue with step number 2. So the penis enters the vagina through sexual contact or mating. When that happens, then the male will ejaculate or release the sperm. Now that sperm will then be released inside into what we call the vagina. Now, when that happens, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to find that through the cervix, the uterus is going to enter, and then that's going to go through the fallopian tubes. So basically, that what happens is that there are different, or rather, there's so many sperms that are actually released through the sexual or the mating activity, but only one sperm is actually going to fertilize the one egg. So the first sperm to fertilize, or rather to arrive, is the one that's going to obviously be fertilized. So when that happens, it's then going to create or make what we call an embryo. So again, what is an embryo, ladies and gentlemen? An embryo is a fertilized egg. What is fertilization? It is the combination of the egg and the sperm cell. So into 3 months of the fertilization, we then get what we call an embryo. The third step there that I want to speak to is what we call gestation. Now, again, that is also a scientific term. You will notice that there are words that I have underlined, that I have highlighted. I've done that for the purposes of the exams that we're going to write in June, of course, and in December. And in each and every exam that we write, as including tests, of course, there is what they call scientific terms. So the underlying terms are what we usually use as scientific terms. So gestation is nothing else but the period wherein an embryo develops inside the female uterus. So the development of that embryo, and remember we said an embryo is nothing else but a fertilized egg after the 3 months of fertilization. So a gestation is when that egg then starts to develop. And obviously it's developing into what? Into a child. All right, step number 4. Excuse me, I'm just trying to find my screen. I'm not seeing you guys anymore. Let me see. Right. There we go. I can see you guys again. So sorry about that. Welcome back. All right. So number 4, the embryo then develops into what we call a fetus. Now, what is a fetus? A fetus is an unborn baby that is still developing. Where is it developing? In the uterus. I think maybe we should go back to the structure. So you will see that on the right-hand side, on the structure that is labeled female reproductive structure. At the top there is the uterus. It is a hollow space that is found inside the female reproductive system, and that's where everything basically happens. And by everything I mean, that is where, as we know, during mating, the sperm is going to go up. I wish I had a cursor, let me apologize for that. The sperm is going to go up through the vagina, it's going to travel through the fallopian tubes, and it's going to then obviously be fertilized inside the uterus. Inside the uterus, it's then going to form what we call an embryo. And remember, we said an embryo is nothing else but a fertilized egg. All right, so that is going to happen. And then after the embryo is developing, it's then going to create what we call a fetus. Now, a fetus is a small baby. I've got certain illustrations on the next slide. We're going to explore those illustrations. Step number 5 in my summary of how human reproduction happens in human beings. After the 9 months, we will then have a process that is called labor. Now, labor is obviously when the baby comes out or when the baby is pushed out of the uterus. So basically, in a nutshell, labor is giving birth. But again, I said, when we think about the test or the exam, in the multiple choice questions that we will ask you, for an example, we might say, labor is a process wherein the baby is pushed out. True or false? And obviously in this instance, the answer will be true. And then maybe in scientific terms, we will give you a description or an explanation of labor. So what are we going to do? We'll say, for an example, a process wherein a baby is pushed out of the uterus. Then your answer will be labor. Again, ladies and gentlemen, hence I said, let's try to pay attention to the highlighted regions or areas of this PowerPoint presentation. The last part that we need to also note is that if fertilization does not happen, so what does that mean? It means that the egg was released into the uterus from the ovary. Now, when it was released and it was there was no combination of the egg with any sperm. So meaning that absolutely no fertilization happened, absolutely no fertilization occurred at that time. So what does that mean? It means then females are going to go through what we call periods. Now, there's a scientific term for periods. They are called menstruation. So that's menstruation. Let's also be careful in terms of how we write that word. The N, the S, and the T in terms of the correct spelling part of it. Again, it's highlighted there, ladies and gentlemen. Nevertheless, so menstruation is a process wherein the egg that was released by the female once a month again was not fertilized. And because it was not fertilized, the cells, or rather the membrane that covers that egg cell, is going to break down. When it breaks down, it is going to release blood. When it releases that blood, a female or a girl that has gone through puberty, again, remember, prior to going to this topic, we spoke about puberty. I'm assuming that was done at school, but again, we can touch on it. So puberty is basically the development that happens of a young child. So basically the widening of the hips in females, the deepening of the voice in boys. So those are examples of what puberty happens. And puberty is what then matures our reproductive system cells so that they can be mature enough for reproduction to occur. So menstruation happens, again, like I said, when the egg cell did not combine with the sperm, and therefore the layers that cover the ovule or the egg cell are going to break down where in the uterus. When that breaks down, it's going to release blood. The blood is going to come out through the vagina, and that's going to be menstruation, which differs from one female to the other, and that happens for a period of about 4 to 7 days. So for 4 to 7 days, there's going to be blood that is being released. And why is that? Because there was no fertilization of that egg that happened. And then again, after a month, the same process will occur until the egg has fertilized with the sperm. And then for that period of 9 months, the female will then not go through menstruation or period as we commonly know it. Moving into the next slide, these are just picture illustrations of the sperm and the egg that I'm referring to. So you will see, like I've mentioned before, during mating, there is a variation, or there's a large pool of sperms that are going to be released during ejaculation. Now, the first sperm that combines with the egg is the one that is going to be fertilized. So as you can see, we have about how many? 7 that are there, but only one, which is the first one on my left, I'm assuming your left as well, that is then going to be the one that actually fertilizes that egg. Now, the bottom picture there shows us the development process after the embryo or the fertilization has occurred. So basically, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to start from the right-hand side, the top right-hand side of the picture. Again, I wish I had a cursor, but we'll sort that out. Let me apologize. So from the right-hand side, the top corner, an illustration that is similar to the one above is showing us where there's several sperm cells that want to mate, or rather not mate, that want to fertilize the one egg. So only one is able to do that. Then we can see there's a development of the ball of cells moving from the right-hand side in a circular fashion that's moving to the left. So as it moves to the left, we can see that there's an embryo in the one where there's like about 4 cells that are clustered around each other. That embryo then obviously develops. And remember, we said when the embryo begins to develop, that development is called gestation. And so there it is again there, ladies and gentlemen, so that we can see the picture and obviously compare it to the wording, or rather the theory part of what is going on there. And then we can see the development. Now, when we reach, as I'm moving, again, I apologize for not having a cursor. I can say in picture number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, in picture number 6 or 7, that is what we then call a fetus. So that is like a baby that's fully developing. You can start to see the hands, you can start to see the head, you can start to see the legs. So therefore that then becomes a fetus. But the ball of cells prior to that is what we call the embryo, and that is nothing else but a fertilized egg. Now moving on into the next slide again, ladies and gentlemen. So the baby is born. So what does that mean? So basically you've gone through a period where in the, again, a bit of going back or revision here, once a month, the female will release an ovule that will await fertilization. When that is fertilized, that is the combination of the egg that was released with the sperm through the process of mating. Now, when that happens, there's a development that occurs where in the uterus, we've shown you the pictures prior to this. Now, when that is happening in the uterus, we then go through a period of development from the embryo to the fetus again. And I said the fetus is when you can start to see the parts of the baby and all of that. Now, 9 months later, labor occurs. And labor is when the baby is pushed out of the vagina or basically giving birth. Now, when that has happened, here's the baby. So what does that mean? Now, this is taking us again to the objectives of the lesson. Allow me again to browse back into the objectives, because the objectives are going to assist us to say, what have we done? What have we not done? So we have defined reproduction. We have understood how human reproduction occurs by looking at the structures of both the male and the female. So meaning that there's only one element that is not spoken about there, and that is the variation element. And that's what we want to speak to right now after the baby has been born in the 9 months. So I want to remind ourselves again that when the baby is made through the sperm of the father, and it's also made through the egg of the mother. So the baby is actually a combination of 2 mature individuals. So when we go into your grade, you guys are actually very fortunate. They're going into grade 10 next, grade 8 next year. When you go into grade 8 and 9, in grade 10, you choose a stream. Now, when you choose a stream, that's an area of specialization. Now, if you go into an area of specialization in grade 10 all the way to 12, if you happen to choose biology, which is now called life sciences, you will speak about what is called chromosomes. And I'm only bringing this now. I'm aware that it might not be correct to do so in terms of the curricula of the level, which is grade 7, but it's important for the understanding. Nevertheless, so chromosomes are what comes from the mother and the father. The mother will contribute 23 chromosomes. The father will contribute 23 chromosomes. They will all combine and make 46 chromosomes. Now, in the 46 that is being combined, obviously, those are the certain characteristics that are going to come from both your mother and both your father. So meaning that as we are speaking to each other, we are a combination of 4 chromosomes. And that is why there are certain things about you that resemble your mother, some resemble your father, some resemble your father's mother. So basically, that's what we are speaking to because of the chromosomes. Again, like I said, this is from your grade 10 all the way to grade 12, but we are speaking about it now so that we can know what it is that we are speaking to. Now, because of that, there are certain inherited characteristics that you are going to get from both your mother and your father. And that is what we are going to talk about in relation to variation. So characteristics are nothing else but features. So what are these features? The features, as I've alluded prior, the features would be the nose that you have. My nose is flat like this, ladies and gentlemen, because of my grandmother who passed on. May her soul rest in peace. But she had a very flat nose. So that's how I know. And obviously, from my mother, that's how I then inherited this nose. But my dark color comes from my father. So I've got 2 things that I'm giving to you as examples. The nose that I've inherited from my mother, and of course, my dark skin or the dark color, that is a resemblance, that is a characteristics that comes from my father's side. So that is how I've inherited both of them. Why? Because my father and my mother mated. They then created myself, and therefore that's why I have both their characteristics. So basically, going back, when we speak about these variations, what are we talking about? We are speaking about the small differences that exist within a species. Now, you will remember one of the first topics that we do in natural sciences is the classification of living things. In the classification of living things, we are told that living things are made up of plants and animals. Within plants and animals, there are certain groups of plants that are of the same kind, certain group of animals that are of the same kind. But as we know, because of what we call evolution, again, ladies and gentlemen, when you go to grade 10, 11, and 12, you'll speak about that in much detail. When we speak about life sciences, as I've alluded, it was called biology during our time, very long time ago. Nevertheless, so variations are small differences that exist between living things of the same species. Now, if you are watching this video with me right now, probably with your sister, your brother, your father, or your friend, you are of the same species. What is that species? That species, in scientific terms, we call them Homo sapiens, or for easy understanding, humans. However, as much as you are human with the same person you are with, probably next to you or in front of you or in the next room, there are certain differences that exist between yourself and that individual. And those small differences are called variations. What is an example of those differences? Maybe they are shorter than you. Maybe you are taller than them. Maybe they are later than you. Maybe you've got big ears like mine. So those small differences that then you will have, but you guys are existing in the same species, or you are the same species. Those are what we are speaking about when we speak about variations, ladies and gentlemen. Now, moving into the next slide. Before we meet again, I want us to revise these. Like I said, these are topics that I believe that not much justice was done because of the abrupt ending into our school term, because of the unfortunate time that we find ourselves. But thanks God to STEM, as well as SASOL at the Department of Education, and of course, African Teen Geeks, we find ourselves having this platform, so therefore we can touch on that. These are the questions that I want us to look at as a revision for our next activity next week. The first one is, what are the 2 human reproductive cells? We spoke about this, ladies and gentlemen. Remember, we said there are 2, and I can give you a hint. They come from either they come from the male and the female. They come from the mother or the father. The second question I want us to ask is that you describe fertilization in your own understanding. So I've given you my definition of fertilization. So how does one define something in their own understanding? I mean, we hear this a lot at school, but sometimes we ask ourselves, what is it that they actually want? What is it that they're talking about? Now, a simple way of doing that, you look at a definition that I've given you, or a definition that you might have from a textbook, or a definition from the internet. Then you take that definition, you paraphrase it in words that mean something to you. You paraphrase it in a way that you will remember. The definition that I gave you of reproduction was taken from several sources. I combined those sources, then I gave that definition because that's what I can remember. I can tell you about it now, but unfortunately, it would almost be as if I'm making you copy the answer for number 2. So let's rather not. We'll talk about that next week. Number 3, I want you to explain the difference that exists between an embryo and a fetus. There are differences that exist there. They may be related, they might be the same to some extent, but there is some difference that is there. So using that difference, I want us to explore the relationship. How are they related, the embryo and the fetus? The 4th part of this activity that we're going to use as a revision exercise is to suggest 2 things that we are going to suggest that they be used by our female classmates, our girl sisters, during the process of menstruation. What are 2 things that you know that are safe, that are sanitary, that are currently being used, that you will suggest that they continue being used? So we suggest those 2 things. Question number 5 takes a life skills type of a turn. And that is us trying to integrate natural sciences with another subject, which is very important, ladies and gentlemen, to integrate the 2 so that we can show that knowledge is actually connected and intertwined. Now, we want you to recommend 2 ways in which you can be able to prevent STIs or pregnancy. Obviously not for us right now, the age does not allow, but we are recommending it for people that are obviously older than us. I mean, we know the stats that currently exist relating to sicknesses, relating to HIV and AIDS, STIs, and pregnancies that are unplanned, etc. So as scientists that are in grade 7, we want to suggest 2 ways that we want to recommend to people who are old enough, who have made conscious decisions to then obviously go through an element of sexual intercourse. We are assisting these people so that they are safer in their activity. And as I've said, and as I've alluded, they are older than us. They are very much aware of their actions. And therefore, we want to assist them to ensure their safety. Now, we want you to please remember, as you are responding on the social media platforms, ladies and gentlemen, please kindly hashtag lockdown eSchool in all your answers. So for your answer for number 1, you will say, what are the 2 reproductive sex cells? When you give an answer, you give the answer, you say full stop, then you hashtag lockdown eSchool so that we can be able to follow and keep obviously the communications going and we can assist each other. Remember, the element that we want to create here is interactive and collaborative learning. So the more we hashtag, the easier it is for us to trace different and variations of answers. All right, so that is what we have spoken about. These are some of the links that you can have a look at. These are going to be posted on the GDE website along with certain lesson videos. These are the links that are going to assist you in terms of how this lesson came about and the preparations. In these links, you will find that there are some videos that will explain to you. Unfortunately, because of time, I'm unable to do that. But as I'm saying, we will post these as well in terms of the video and the lesson. So you can follow these links and during your own time, you can listen to certain videos that will then obviously further explain what we have done. Now, I want us to talk about the next time that we meet again in terms of what it is that we are doing. Remember, I said we are not going to move into term 2 without taking stock or account of the fact that in term 1, there were certain aspects or topics that were not covered. So we have tried to do our best in terms of focusing on the 2 last topics that were supposed to be done. However, what is it that we're doing next week in term 2? Now, this is very important. Remember, schools actually should have already been opened. So meaning that we should be on term 2. But as I've said, we thank this great initiative so that we can be able to be doing term 2 at the comfort of our own homes. Now, we are going to be looking at matter and materials. So that is the strand of science that we are going to be looking at. Remember, in term 1, it's life and living. Term 2, it's matter and materials. But what is the topic that we'll be focusing on matter and materials? That is going to be the physical properties of materials. So I'd like us to remind ourselves and prepare somewhat. If you have a textbook near you, you can browse through the textbook in preparation for that to say, what is it that we are going to be doing with Mr. Songo next week in relation to the physical properties of matter and materials. Obviously, physical means something that is tangible, something that you can touch, something that you can see. Again, we are almost tapping into sensing, which we've said is one of the 7 life processes. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank you very much for listening. Thank you so much for taking your time. Follow us on social media on the platforms that have been shared there. So it's hashtag lockdown is school. It's at Tin Geeks, that's on Facebook as well as YouTube. It's at IZORA, it's at DBE, that's the Department of Basic Education. And of course, we thank the Sasol Foundation and Sasol SA, and of course, STEM champions for this great initiative. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. Let's meet again next week. Let us remember to be able to do those activities, or rather those questions, so that we can see that we've done justice to term 1. Thank you, and have yourselves a great day and a great weekend. Goodbye. My name is Alex Songo. I will see you guys again next week.